Alright, so this is going to be my first entry into a video series I'm going to record. I'm attempting to raise my clownfish larvae. Here you can see them in their eggs. This is the second hatch, the clutch that this pair has laid. Black and white Ocellaris clownfish. I got this pair. They were a trade-in to my local fish store. So I'm really not sure if they had ever laid eggs before, or if they didn't maybe have what kind of tank they were in before, who owned them before. The first hatch they laid week before last. These eggs are about 4 days old right now. This is half or maybe even a third number of these eggs, and they weren't nearly as tightly grouped as this clutch right here. So it seemed like it was probably their first time laying, but I really have no idea how old they are. Okay. So first thing I'm talking about is how I got my clownfish to spawn. Like I said, I have no idea if they spawned before, but from the point I bought them last June, and it's now November, so it took them about it's now December, but they first spawned in November. So it took about 5-6 months to spawn. I run my salinity in this tank at 1.02. The reason for that is, so when clownfish live in shallow coastal waters, and they normally lay their eggs in the spring/summer, and during that time period, there's a lot of rains, a lot of river washout coming into the oceans and kind of lowering the salinity of their environment. Also, a salinity of 1.02 is better for raising the larvae, and because they have to do less work to osmoregulate to maintain balance, to keep their salinity that's in their body a little lower than what their surrounding salinity they would normally be if it was the normal salinity of 1.025. Now that I feed them about several times a day, especially when I'm off work. I have 2 different pellet foods I use: New Life Spectrum and Omega 1 Marine Mini Pellets. I just kind of have them mixed together and I feed them from either one of these containers several times a day. In addition to that, normally at night, I feed them frozen food. It's a mix of Myas and Cyclopezi, so frozen copepods. Use those copepods, even though they're small, not very nutritious. It's the same thing. It's kind of the idea of that planktonic bloom, so maybe it kind of signals to them that, well, this is pretty much what our larvae would eat, so they have a good shot at survival. As far as my actual broodstock tank, this is the Fluval Evo 12.5 or 13.5, I can't remember. It's kind of, my setup is what most people would tell you not to do. As you can see, I've got a lot of algae in here. Even though I have a lot of algae, I've never had a single water quality issue with this tank. Never had any ammonia or high levels of nitrates or nitrites. And while it's not ideal for you to have algae on top of your flower pot, coral and marlin here love it. They're constantly rubbing around on that algae up there, hosting it, kind of like it's their anemone on top of their little breeding cave here. A lot of people tell you not to use sand, but this tank's in my office and I was going to be looking at it for a long time, so I just kind of wanted it to look pretty. I wanted to have something nice to look at, not just a bare bottom tank, even though it does make it a lot more of a hassle to keep clean. As far as cleanup crew in here, the only thing I have is 2 hermit crabs, There's a Ceres snail hiding in here somewhere. There used to be 2 Ceres snails, but one of them became a hermit crab shell, and then you can barely see him. He's kind of behind this dirty spot on the glass here. My big Mexican turbo snail. This is really overall a good tank to use for. I really like this tank. The only downside to it is if you're trying to get your clownfish to spawn, it's important. One of the things I really recommend is to give them 16 hours of light a day. And the problem is this tank, the light it comes with, is kind of a cheap reef light. So it's designed to be able to sustain, to grow some LPS and some SPS corals in it. But the problem is it's a cheap light, so it's got a couple of blue LEDs on there, but the majority of it is just white light. It's white LEDs, so it really kind of fuels this algae you see going on here. Of course, on top of the gross overfeeding I do to try and get these guys to help spawn nice, healthy clutches. Alright. I'll show you my rotifer setup. So interestingly, you can raise clownfish, a small number, off of just now what they make specially formulated dry powder foods. You can probably get a few survivors out of a hatch, but if you want to really get a good number of survivors, you have to still go with live rotifers. I'm not going to go in depth here about how to raise, how to culture the rotifers or green water, phytoplankton. There's a million good resources out there already on that. My rotifers, they came from aquaculture nursery farms, rusalty.com. Right here is their food. I feed them. I don't grow my own phytoplankton. This stuff is pretty similar to what most people use, called RG Grow, but RG Grow is very expensive. And I've had my rotifers growing and feeding like crazy off of this stuff. Turn this. See all those little specks in there are rotifers. This tank kind of constantly has a lot of this debris flying through the air because they love to kick it up, just like you saw her do, kind of aggressively rub around and kick sand and all the shit they can find up into the air. Okay, so that concludes this video. If you have any questions on pairing clownfish, how I got my clownfish to spawn, broodstock setup, or growing rotifers, feel free to ask down in the comments section. Next video will be in a couple days. It will be on hatch night, when all these blackish colored eggs have a nice silvery tint over top of them, and I move them into their rotifer tank, into their larval tank. So I'll go over. Next video will be hatch night, talk about my larvae tank setup, and we will see the little tiny half a centimeter long baby clownfish. Okay, thanks for tuning in.